If we were to sit in complete silence right now for exactly 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, I guarantee people are checking their phones right now.
Right. Yeah, you probably thought your audio player just broke. You might have even, reached into your pocket to check your connection or something.
Because in the world of audio, I mean, 5 seconds of dead air is just, it's an absolute eternity.
It really is. It's this massive, just incredibly uncomfortable void. But according to a highly restricted, incredibly specific blueprint that we uncovered for today's deep dive, those 5 seconds, that agonizing silence, might actually be the exact neurological key to unlocking fluency in a completely foreign language.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because, we spend decades, right, trying to figure out why adults fail so miserably at learning new languages while little kids just seem to, absorb them effortlessly.
Like sponges, they just pick it up.
Exactly. And our standard solution is always to just throw more stuff at the problem. We use flashcards, thick grammar textbooks, translation apps, assuming that if we just, input enough raw data, fluency will eventually just output itself.
But the document we're looking at today completely shatters that whole assumption, doesn't it?
It completely destroys it. It argues that we haven't been failing because of a lack of effort or, bad vocabulary lists. We're failing because we are fundamentally ignoring the actual biological and psychological environment that a human brain needs to process new sounds.
Right, which brings us to the actual source material for this deep dive. Now, just to set the stage for you listening, this isn't some theoretical textbook.
No, not at all.
And it isn't a peer-reviewed research paper summarizing past experiments. It's an operational blueprint. It's this strict, rigid, honestly, almost obsessively detailed set of instructions.
Obsessive is definitely the right word for it.
Yeah. And it's designed for one highly specific purpose, which is building the perfect interactive audio lesson for an English learner who is stuck at what they call the A2 level.
Right. And for anyone who isn't, a linguist, A2 is technically the elementary level, but I actually prefer to call it the zone of despair.
The zone of despair. I love that. Why despair?
Well, it's a very accurate clinical description, honestly. When you're an absolute beginner, a true A1, everything is a victory.
Oh, sure. You learn to say hello and you feel like a total genius.
Exactly. You learn to count to 10 and you're just thrilled. But at A2, that's when the illusion of competence really sets in. Just enough to realize the horrifying magnitude of what you actually do not know.
Oh, man. Yeah, I've been there. It's like you can point at a menu and you can order a coffee without causing an international incident.
Right.
But then the second the barista asks you a follow-up question like, do you want room for cream in that? Your entire prefrontal cortex just completely shuts down.
Yep. You experience total cognitive gridlock because you actually have the building blocks in your head, like the vocabulary words are floating around in your memory somewhere.
You're in there.
They are. But the neural pathways that connect those words to your physical mouth are just completely underdeveloped.
So when someone is, standing there tapping their foot waiting for you to respond, the pressure just spikes.
Exactly. Cortisol floods your system and you are left completely paralyzed. You just freeze.
And that paralysis, that exact freezing feeling, is what this entire blueprint is designed to cure. So, for our mission today, we're going to deconstruct this entire architectural schematic.
Piece by piece.
Piece by piece. We're going to look at the ruthless word count limits, the psychological manipulation of those forced 5-second pauses we just talked about, and this highly advanced technique called shadowing.
Shadowing is the real game changer here, especially for learning English.
Oh, absolutely. It's a technique that completely bypasses the analytical brain. And by breaking down the rules of this single document, we are going to uncover the hidden mechanics of how your brain actually acquires a language. So, jumping right in, looking at the very top of the blueprint, the first section dictates the rules of engagement, basically the absolute guardrails for the instructor.
And the document is immediately aggressive about limitations. I mean, it commands the instructor to speak slowly, clearly, and to project this persona of a warm, encouraging friend.
Which sounds nice, but then it gets strict.
Very strict. The mandate that dictates the entire structural integrity of the lesson is this. The instructor must never use difficult grammar, they must avoid all idioms, and sentences must be strictly limited to between 5 and 12 words.
Okay, 5 to 12 words, not 15, not 3. When I first read that, I was so struck by how exact it is. Why cut someone off at 12 words? Like, what happens at word 13?
Well, to understand why 12 words is the absolute ceiling, We have to look at how your working memory operates, specifically through the lens of something called the phonological loop.
Okay, phonological loop. Unpack that for me. What does that actually mean?
Sure, so think of your working memory like a computer's RAM.
Okay.
It's this highly volatile, strictly finite workspace where your brain holds information just long enough to process it.
So it's short term.
Very short term. The phonological loop is basically the audio component of that RAM. Now, when you're listening to your native language, your brain groups words together into concepts instantly. It compresses the data, right?
Because we already know the pattern.
Exactly. But when an A2 English learner is listening to a second language, there is no automatic compression happening at all. Every single word is a massive uncompressed file.
Oh, wow. So they're essentially opening a new heavy browser tab for every single word they hear.
Yes. And what happens to your laptop when you open 20 heavy browser tabs at the exact same time?
The fan starts screaming, the cursor freezes, and the whole system just crashes.
The system crashes. And the human brain does the exact same thing. If you deliver a 20-word sentence to an A2 learner, they are actively decoding word number 1, they're translating word number 2 into their native language, they're trying to map the grammar of word number 3.
And they fall behind immediately.
Right. By the time they reach word number 13, the RAM is completely full. So the brain simply starts deleting the beginning of the sentence just to make room for the end of the sentence.
That is wild. They literally lose the thread entirely.
Entirely. So the 5 to 12 word rule isn't just a stylistic choice, it's a literal hardware limitation. You are actively preventing the cognitive RAM from maxing out.
You're keeping the tab count low enough that the system remains stable? I love that analogy.
Right.
And I assume this directly ties into the blueprint's absolute ban on idioms, right?
Oh, absolutely. Idioms are the ultimate system crashers for a fragile working memory.
Because they just defy all logic. I mean, if I tell an A2 learner that a math test was a piece of cake, I'm sending them down this huge contextual dead end.
Let's actually trace the cognitive sequence of that dead end because it's fascinating. The learner hears the phrase piece of cake.
Okay.
They successfully decode the noun piece, and they decode the noun cake.
So far, so good.
Right. Then their brain diligently retrieves the visual image of a literal slice of frosted pastry.
Naturally.
They are holding that pastry in their working memory, and then they try to connect it to the algebra test you were just discussing.
And there is zero logical connection between a pastry and an algebra test.
None. The linguistic hardware is searching for a bridge that simply does not exist. And this happens because idioms rely entirely on shared cultural history.
Right, not on logical word-for-word translation.
Exactly. So when the A2 brain realizes the literal translation doesn't match the reality of the conversation, it triggers this massive spike of confusion, which immediately leads to anxiety.
Which brings up another fascinating rule in these guardrails. Because while it bans idioms, the blueprint mandates that the instructor must repeat important words naturally.
Yes, naturally is the key word there.
Right? It doesn't say drill the vocabulary until they cry. It says repeat it naturally. I kind of like to think of this as dropping acoustic breadcrumbs. You use the target word in a 6-word sentence. Then, maybe 2 minutes later, you use it again in an 8-word sentence.
Yeah, the mechanism at play here is spaced exposure, but without the pressure of a formal test. Because when you drill someone, you're putting them on the spot.
The spotlight is on you.
But when you naturally weave a word into the fabric of a slow, clear, short sentence multiple times, the brain's pattern recognition software just kind of kicks in the background.
It's almost subconscious.
It is. It registers the repetition, and it flags that acoustic signature as, important data to keep. And the learner doesn't even feel the stress of being formally taught.
Which is something I think we intuitively do in the real world anyway, right? Without even realizing it.
I mean,
Well, think about if you're training a brand new hire on their very first day at the office. Or, say, you're trying to explain a complex board game to a 10-year-old. You don't hit them with a 40-word monologue full of corporate jargon or complex rules.
right, you'd scare them off.
Exactly. You naturally shorten your sentences. You emphasize the core verbs. You give their brain the space to process what you just said. It feels like this blueprint is basically just taking our natural, empathetic communication style and, weaponizing it for language acquisition.
That's a great way to put it. It systematizes empathy into a rigid pedagogical structure.
So if we accept that the working memory is super fragile, and we've set up these 5 to 12 word guardrails to protect the RAM from crashing, how do we actually begin to construct a lesson?
Right, we have to actually build the thing.
Exactly. And if we look at section 2 of the blueprint, which is the architecture of a lesson, it dictates a 1 to 2 minute warm-up.
Uh-huh.
But here is where it gets incredibly specific.
Yeah.
The instructor must introduce the topic and then ask exactly 2 easy questions. Before any teaching occurs, before any vocabulary is introduced, you must force the learner to answer 2 easy questions.
The sequence here is so critical. By placing the questions at the very threshold of the interaction, you are violently shattering the expectation of a passive lecture.
See, I have to stop you there. Because, wait, I would think asking questions before you teach anything would induce total panic. I mean, if I sit down for an English lesson and the very first thing you do is interrogate me, my guard is going straight up.
And that would absolutely be true if the questions were challenging. But the blueprint explicitly specifies they must be easy questions. Questions the learner already has the linguistic tools to answer.
Like what?
Things like, how is the weather today? Or did you drink coffee this morning? We are actively manipulating the brain's reward system here.
Okay, walk me through the neurochemistry of that. Why does an easy question help? Because it seems too basic.
Well, we mentioned earlier that anxiety floods the system with cortisol, and cortisol is the enemy of learning. It literally physically inhibits the hippocampus from forming new memories.
Wow, really? Blocks memory.
It does. In linguistics, we call this the affective filter. When the affective filter is high, the brain is in defense mode. It's focused on survival, so no new language is getting in.
Okay, so how do the easy questions fix that?
By asking an easy question, the learner answers successfully. That micro-success triggers a small release of dopamine.
Ah,
And dopamine is the chemical of reward and motivation. It actively suppresses the cortisol, which lowers the affective filter.
so you're manufacturing a victory. You are rigging the game so they win in the first 60 seconds,
Exactly.
which chemically opens their brain up to receive the actual difficult material that's coming next.
You are priming the neurological pathways for output. You're telling the brain, hey, this is a two-way street. We are communicating. We aren't just listening.
It's kind of like warming up before a heavy workout, right? You don't just walk into the gym and immediately try to deadlift 300 pounds.
Or you'd pull a muscle immediately.
Right. You stretch, you do some light cardio, you essentially tell your central nervous system that work is about to happen.
And once that nervous system is primed and the affective filter is lowered by that dopamine hit, the blueprint moves directly into the core vocabulary. But again, it applies an incredibly strict operational sequence here.
Right, I noticed this. For every single new word, the instructor has to follow this rigid checklist.
Yep.
They must pronounce it clearly, explain it in simple English, provide one easy example, ask the learner to repeat it, and they're ordered to pause for 5 full seconds.
This is the void.
This is the void. This is the 5 seconds of dead air we open the show with. And I really have to push back on this because from a purely user experience standpoint, 5 seconds is agonizing.
It feels like forever.
It does. If I'm an A2 learner listening to an audio lesson on my commute, and the host just stops talking for 5 seconds, I'm either going to get incredibly bored, check out, or I'm going to hit the fast forward button.
Sure.
So how does this blueprint prevent the user from abandoning the lesson out of sheer frustration?
Well, you're looking at the pause through the lens of a native speaker consuming entertainment.
Okay, fair.
For a native speaker, 5 seconds is an empty void. But for an A2 learner who has just been asked to reproduce a completely foreign sound, those 5 seconds are not empty at all. They represent a chaotic, high-energy, high-CPU processing cycle. Honestly, if they are bored during those 5 seconds, the instructor asked the wrong question.
That's a fascinating way to frame it. So what is physically happening in their brain during that 5-second countdown? Because obviously it's not just resting.
Oh, not at all. It is a massive, multi-tiered computational sequence. Let's actually break it down step by step.
Let's do it.
First, the acoustic wave of the English prompt enters their ear. The brain has to decode those phonetic sounds into recognizable words. That's step 1.
Just figuring out what sounds they just heard.
Exactly. Step 2, they have to translate those English words into their native language to grasp the actual conceptual meaning.
Yep.
Step 3, they have to formulate a response to the prompt in their native language.
So they're thinking about the answer, but still in their mother tongue.
Right. And then, step 4, they must translate that newly formed concept back into English vocabulary.
Man, that is already 4 heavy cognitive loads, and they literally haven't even opened their mouth yet.
Exactly. They're just thinking. Then step 5 is mapping the English grammar to ensure those words are actually in the correct order.
Right, making sure the verb tense is right, the subject is in the right place.
Yep. And finally, step 6. The motor cortex has to send highly specific neurological signals to the diaphragm, the vocal cords, the jaw, the tongue, and the lips to physically articulate those foreign sounds out into the air.
So it's hearing, decoding, translating, conceptualizing, retranslating, grammar mapping, and physical muscle firing.
It is an exhausting physiological checklist. And here's the thing, it takes time.
Right.
If you only give an A2 learner a 2-second pause before you jump in with the next teaching point, they are still stuck on step 3.
Oh, wow.
They're still trying to conceptualize the answer in their native language, and suddenly you are hitting them with new English audio.
So you're throwing more browser tabs at them while they're still trying to load the first one.
Exactly. You trigger the crash. By mandating a rigid, unyielding 5-second pause, the blueprint provides the literal grace period required to execute that 6-step cognitive sequence.
It just removes the panic completely.
It does. It shifts the burden of work off the instructor and places it squarely onto the learner, forcing them to run the sequence to completion.
It's forced processing time. You
Yeah.
cannot rush the assembly line. I love that. So we've primed the brain with easy questions, we've lowered the cortisol, and we're introducing vocabulary with these deliberate spacious pauses to allow for full cognitive processing.
Right.
Now the blueprint moves into step 3, which is the immersion engine, the listening practice phase.
And this is a crucial transition because up until now, we've been dealing with isolated words and isolated short sentences, but language doesn't exist in isolation.
Right, nobody just speaks in single words.
Exactly. We have to move from isolated vocabulary to connected narrative meaning.
And the blueprint handles this with yet another severe constraint. The instructor is ordered to tell a very short story. And I mean short. Exactly 40 to 80 words, not a word more.
It's tiny.
It is. And they must deploy a dual reading method. They read the story once slowly, and then they immediately read it a second time at a natural native speed.
So let's examine that word count constraint first. 40 to 80 words is an incredibly tight window for a narrative.
It's like a microdose of storytelling. I mean, it's just long enough to have a character, maybe a conflict, and a resolution.
Right.
So you have a narrative arc to hold on to, but it's short enough that you don't get lost in the weeds of syntax. Because if you try to give an A2 learner a 300-word story, they are going to lose the plot by word 100, their RAM will max out, and they will just surrender.
Exactly. But the narrative arc, however brief it is, provides what we call narrative glue.
Narrative glue. I like that.
The human brain is evolutionarily wired to retain stories vastly better than it retains isolated data points. When you embed the new vocabulary into a 60-word story, those words are suddenly contextualized.
They aren't just floating abstract concepts anymore.
Right, they are anchored to a protagonist doing an action. But the true genius of this section, honestly, is the dual reading mandate.
Yeah, let's get into that. Why read it slowly and then immediately run it back at full speed? If I already read it slowly and the learner understood the vocabulary, why speed it up and risk confusing them all over again?
Because understanding isolated words is not the same as understanding spoken language in the wild. This addresses a major linguistic phenomenon known as connected speech, or sometimes it's called assimilation.
Connected speech.
Right. When native speakers talk, regardless of the language, we do not pronounce words as distinct separate units.
Yeah.
We want to conserve breath and muscular energy, so our vocal cords naturally look for shortcuts.
We get lazy, essentially.
Basically, yeah. Consonants merge into vowels, hard sounds soften, and sometimes entire syllables are just dropped completely.
Okay, give me an example of connected speech in English so I can hear it.
The classic example is a simple question: what are you going to do? Now, a native speaker almost never articulates all 6 of those words clearly.
Definitely not.
They blend them into a single acoustic mass, and it sounds like, what you gonna do?
What you gonna do? Yeah, the T and the Y smash together to make a chi sound.
Exactly.
It just becomes one giant blurry word.
Yeah. And to a native speaker, it sounds perfectly clear. But to an A2 English learner who has memorized the distinct textbook pronunciation of what are you going to and do, that rapid connected speech sounds like an impenetrable wall of noise.
Because they can't find the edges of the words.
Exactly. They can't segment the sounds.
Think about that feeling, right? If you've ever studied a language in high school and then traveled abroad, you step off the plane in Paris or Tokyo or Mexico City feeling pretty confident about your flashcards, and a taxi driver asks you a standard question at natural speed.
Yeah.
Your brain just completely short circuits.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like the language you studied at all. It just sounds like a continuous aggressive hum.
We actually call that the taxi driver panic.
Really?
Yes. And the dual reading method is the specific antidote to that panic. Because the first read, the slow, highly articulated read, allows the learner's brain to successfully decode the vocabulary and map the grammar.
Right.
They grasp the narrative meaning of the 40 to 80 words without feeling overwhelmed.
So they get the blueprint of the house first.
Exactly. Then, the immediate natural read provides the actual acoustic reality of how those words exist in the physical world. Because they already know the meaning from the slow read, their brain can now focus entirely on listening to how the edges of the words blur together. They are learning to map the textbook vocabulary onto the chaotic reality of connected speech.
You are breaking down that wall of noise brick by brick. You're basically showing them the trick behind the magic trick.
That's a perfect analogy. It bridges that massive gap between academic knowledge and real-world auditory processing.
Which brings us to the ultimate test. Section 4 of the blueprint covers steps 4, 5, and 6. And this is where the training wheels finally come off, and we dive into the core focus of today's deep dive, shadowing.
Yes, the shadowing technique.
But before we get to shadowing, the blueprint ramps up the pressure a bit. Step 4 is speaking practice. The instructor asks open-ended questions like, what do you think? Or what do you usually do on the weekend? Followed by our trusty 5-second pause.
Notice the shift in the cognitive demand here, though.
Yeah.
During the warm-up, we asked easy questions with distinct factual answers. Now, the questions are abstract. They require the learner to pull from their own personal experience, formulate an opinion, and translate that opinion into English.
It's a huge step up. But step 5 takes it to a level I have never seen in a standard language lesson before. The blueprint calls it conversation practice.
Right.
The instructor constructs a dialogue, perhaps 5 to 8 turns long. The instructor speaks their line, and then they leave the learner's part completely blank. They just wait for 5 seconds of silence, and then the instructor continues naturally, as if the learner just spoke their line perfectly. I call this audio karaoke.
Audio karaoke is such a brilliant metaphor for this.
Because it is. You're handed a rhythm, a backing track, and the context of a conversation, and you have to fill in the blank perfectly on cue before the track keeps moving.
And it builds a sense of conversational momentum. In the real world, you don't have unlimited time to formulate your sentences. The conversation moves.
People interrupt, they change subjects.
Exactly. By creating this simulated dialogue, you're introducing the pressure of timing, but in a safe, controlled environment where a mistake won't cost you anything.
And all of this, the 5 to 12 word limits, the pauses, the dual reading, the audio karaoke, it's all laying the foundation for the ultimate technique outlined in the blueprint.
The shadowing.
Right. Step 6 dictates a pronunciation focus, where the instructor picks 5 specific words, points out exactly where the syllable stress is, and gives one example sentence. Why? Because the homework explicitly requires the learner to complete 5 shadowing sentences.
This really is the crescendo of the entire document. Shadowing is arguably the most powerful mechanism for adult language acquisition ever developed. And everything in this blueprint is designed to prepare the A2 brain to execute it successfully.
We really need to spend some serious time here. What exactly is shadowing? I've heard the term thrown around in polyglot circles on YouTube, but how does it actually work in practice?
So, shadowing is a highly active, physically demanding listening and speaking technique. You listen to a native speaker audio track, in this case, English, and you attempt to repeat what they're saying almost simultaneously.
Wait, simultaneously?
Yes. You do not wait for them to finish the sentence and then pause the tape to repeat it.
Oh, wow.
You are their vocal shadow. You are speaking a split second behind them, talking over them, matching their exact rhythm, their stress, their intonation, and their connected speech.
So it isn't just about regurgitating the vocabulary. It sounds like you were doing an impression. You're acting.
You are. You are literally impersonating the acoustic signature of a native speaker.
Okay, let's actually demonstrate this so you listening can hear what we mean. Let's run a micro experiment right now in the studio.
Okay, I'm game.
I want you to say a sentence, something a bit complex, and I'm going to try to shadow you exactly as you say it.
All right. I will speak at a natural pace. Ready?
Ready? Let's do it.
The phenomenon of cognitive overload is...
The phenomena of cognitive overload is...
frequently observed in adult language learners.
Frequently observed in adult language learners.
When they attempt to process complex syntax.
When they attempt to process complex syntax.
Wow. How did that feel?
Okay. Just doing that for one sentence, I immediately feel how much brain power that requires. And the crazy thing is, I wasn't even thinking about the meaning of the words you were saying.
Exactly.
I was entirely focused on matching the exact micro-cadence of your voice. You know, the way you stressed the word frequently, the way you dropped your pitch at the end. It was all physical.
And that observation is precisely why shadowing is so incredibly effective for learning English. You just highlighted the core mechanism. It bypasses the analytical brain.
Explain that a bit more,
Mm.
because my brain felt like it was working in overdrive just now.
It was working in overdrive, but it was using a completely different engine. Think back to the 6-step sequence we discussed earlier: the decoding, the translating, the grammar mapping. When an adult tries to speak a new language, they are constantly plagued by the analytical burden of inventing what to say. They are rummaging through their mental filing cabinet looking for the right verb conjugation.
Which eats up all the RAM.
It consumes 100% of the working memory. But shadowing completely removes the burden of invention.
Because the script is already provided.
Yes, the grammar is flawless by default. The vocabulary is pre-selected. Because you do not have to invent what to say, your brain is entirely freed up to focus on how to say it.
That makes so much sense. You are redirecting all of that processing power away from the abstract rules of grammar, and you're funneling it directly into the physical mechanics of speech.
Because speaking a language is ultimately a physical act. We treat it like an intellectual math problem, right?
We really do.
But it is much closer to learning a martial arts kata or like learning to play the saxophone.
You're literally asking the muscles in your jaw, your tongue, your lips, and your larynx to contort themselves into positions they have never held in your entire life.
Exactly. When you shadow, you are bypassing the slow, clunky translation software of the brain, and you're downloading the phonetic data directly into your muscle memory. You are training the articulatory system to feel what natural English actually feels like in the mouth.
You know, I have a friend who used this exact technique without even knowing it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's a native Vietnamese speaker, and she moved to the U.S. for a corporate job a few years ago. And her reading and writing were perfect. But she was terrified to speak in meetings because her A2 level pronunciation made her feel really exposed.
That's so common.
It is. So she started listening to English audiobooks read by female narrators on her commute. And she would just aggressively shadow them in her car for an hour every day.
That is brilliant.
Right. She wasn't studying grammar at all. She was just loudly mimicking the narrator's tone, the pauses, the breath work. And within 6 months, her spoken English completely transformed.
Because she stopped treating English as a puzzle to be solved, and she started treating it as a physical habit to be practiced.
Exactly.
This is why the blueprint is so brilliant. It doesn't just throw the learner into shadowing blindly. Step 6 explicitly points out the syllable stress of 5 core words so that when the learner gets to the homework, they have the physical blueprints for the hardest sounds.
It's basically physical therapy for your vocal cords.
It really is.
But this brings us to a massive psychological hurdle. Because if you are sitting in your car loudly mimicking an audiobook or you're trying to shadow this A2 audio lesson, you are going to make mistakes.
Oh, constantly.
You are going to stumble, you are going to mispronounce words, and you are going to sound messy. Which brings us perfectly to the final section of our deep dive, Section 5, Consolidation.
Right. And this section covers the review and homework steps. But more importantly, it introduces the prime directive of the entire blueprint, the overriding philosophy that governs every single constraint we've discussed today.
The blueprint states, in explicit terms, focus on speaking confidence more than grammar perfection.
Which is a radical, almost heretical departure from the last 100 years of traditional language education.
Oh, definitely. Traditional education is completely obsessed with grammar perfection. I mean, it is an industry built on the red pen.
Yep.
If you conjugate a verb wrong, you lose points. If you use the wrong preposition, you fail the test.
And the traditional model, often called the grammar translation method, it creates a psychological environment where making a mistake is a punishable offense.
Right.
But what does that do to an A2 learner? It instills a visceral terror of opening their mouth. If they know their grammar isn't perfect, they will just choose silence over a flawed attempt.
Because they would rather say nothing than look stupid.
Precisely. And silence is the absolute death of language acquisition. The blueprint actually mathematically proves its commitment to confidence over perfection in Step 7, the review step. Let's look at the mandated ratio there.
Yeah, I found this fascinating. The instructor is ordered to review exactly 10 vocabulary words, 5 useful sentences, and only 3 grammar points. 10, 5, 3.
The math tells the entire story right there. The structural weight of the review is heavily tilted toward vocabulary and functional communicative sentences. Grammar is almost an afterthought. It's totally deprioritized.
Because at the A2 level, grammar perfection is a trap.
It's an illusion. The goal at the elementary stage is not flawless native-like execution. The goal is sheer communicative momentum.
Right.
If you use the wrong verb tense, but the barista understands that you want oat milk in your coffee, that is a successful linguistic transaction.
I bet half the people listening to us right now pride themselves on having perfect grammar in their daily emails. You know the type, they double-check their affect versus effect. They make sure their participles aren't dangling.
Oh, for sure.
They view perfectionism as a virtue.
Yeah.
But this blueprint is explicitly telling them that in the realm of acquiring a new verbal skill, their perfectionism is exactly what makes them terrible at it.
Perfection is the enemy of progress here. When you demand grammatical perfection from a fragile working memory, you spike the cortisol, you raise the effective filter, and you crash the RAM.
But when you prioritize messy, loud, confident output, like aggressive shadowing,
You build the actual neurological pathways required for real fluency.
you basically have to be willing to sound like a fool in order to eventually sound like a genius.
Exactly.
Which brings me to the very last, somewhat confusing detail of the blueprint. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about audio, listening, pausing, speaking, shadowing. But the final requirement of the homework, step 8, demands a writing task. The learner must write exactly 50 words.
It's a very sudden, jarring pivot to text at the very end of an audio lesson.
It is. After aggressively training the vocal cords and the auditory processing centers for an entire lesson, why force the learner to sit down and write 50 words? Doesn't that contradict the whole physical speaking philosophy?
It doesn't contradict it at all. It actually cements it. Because throughout the entire interactive audio lesson, the language has been fundamentally ephemeral.
Ephemeral, meaning, it exists in the air as a sound wave for a fraction of a second and then it just disappears.
Exactly. Audio is fleeting. You can't hold a spoken sentence in your hands. By requiring a 50-word writing task at the very end, you are forcing the learner's brain to engage in the ultimate act of cognitive synthesis.
Okay, how so?
You're demanding that they take the acoustic patterns, those shadowy vocal rhythms, and the vocabulary they just practiced, and materialize them into concrete, permanent visual symbols on a physical page.
Oh, wow. So you are transferring the data from the temporary RAM into the permanent hard drive.
It solidifies the neural pathways. It proves that the learner hasn't just mindlessly parroted sounds like a bird, but has genuinely internalized the syntactic structure well enough to reconstruct it from scratch without an audio prompt guiding them.
It is the final lock on the door. It seals the knowledge in. And limiting it to exactly 50 words is brilliant because it maintains that psychological safety net we talked about.
Right. It doesn't overwhelm them.
Exactly. 50 words is just a paragraph. It is an achievable victory. It keeps that dopamine flowing right up to the end of the lesson, ensuring they actually come back for the next one.
This document is honestly a masterclass in scaffolding. It provides exactly enough structural support so the A2 learner doesn't collapse under the cognitive load, but it removes just enough of the guardrails during the shadowing and the writing tasks so they are forced to walk on their own.
It really is an incredible piece of architecture. We started this deep dive looking at what seemed like a simple, somewhat bossy instruction manual for an English teacher.
All right.
But what we actually uncovered was a machine designed to hack the human nervous system.
Beautifully put.
I mean, it uses the strict constraint of 5 to 12 words to protect our finite working memory.
Right.
It leverages the dopamine of easy questions to lower our emotional defenses.
Yeah.
It deploys 5-second pauses to force high-energy cognitive processing. It breaks down the chaotic wall of connected speech with dual reading. And finally, it bypasses our paralyzing, perfectionist, analytical brains by forcing us into the physical muscle memory act of shadowing. It doesn't just teach English. It physically rewires the brain to accept it.
It really proves that acquiring a complex skill isn't about raw intelligence. It's about managing the psychological environment in which the brain operates.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this incredibly dense deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, and it ties back to the very beginning of our conversation.
The pause.
The pause. We've spent all this time dissecting how powerful that 5-second pause is for an A2 English learner. We've seen how it provides the grace and the necessary cognitive space to decode, translate, and formulate a response without panic.
Right.
But I want you to consider applying that exact same 5-second rule to your own native language, to your everyday life.
That's interesting.
We live in a culture that demands instant responses. We view silence in a conversation as a weakness or, a sign of unintelligence. But the next time someone asks you a genuinely difficult question, whether it's a colleague in a high-pressure meeting, your partner during an argument, or a friend asking for advice, what might happen if you actively resisted the urge to immediately fill the void?
Just let the silence sit.
Just let it sit. What if you simply sat in complete, unbroken silence for 5 full seconds before opening your mouth? Could that built-in intentional pause be the secret, not just to learning a new language, but to achieving better, deeper, and more empathetic thinking entirely?